Okay, so a question came in today that I thought was really good, so I wanted to address it for just a minute. A woman reached out and she said, okay, what is the point of boundaries if my husband completely overruns them? Or I'm making these boundaries and he could be doing whatever the heck he wants. So her boundary was, if you look at pornography, you have to tell me within 24 hours. And if you have a slip or a relapse, tell me within 24 hours. And then if you do that, then I will feel sad and hurt, but there won't be additional consequences. And if you don't tell me, then you need to leave the house for a minimum of 24 hours. And so it's a great boundary. She had put a lot of thought into it. But she said, if my husband is acting out and hiding it, I mean, what's the point of the boundary? Because it's not like we can do anything anyway. So, great question. What is the point of the boundary? Boundaries are for you. They're to create safety for you. They're not for the person. And as much as we want our boundaries to keep us safe, they don't control other people. They're just put in place so they can be helpful. There's a quote, her name is Sharon Martin, and she said that you can't make people respect your boundaries. If they don't, then you have to decide whether you accept their behavior, detach, or end the relationship. So she reiterates that there's nothing you can do to control their behavior. But what you can do is you can have those boundaries in place so that if you do find out about the behavior, then you know exactly how you will react. You know how you're going to keep yourself safe. So instead of giving your power away saying, whatever happens to me, like I can't do anything. When you have that attitude of I'm powerless, then you can't do anything. You've given your power away. But with boundaries, you take your power back. You say, if this happens, then this is what happens. If this happens, then I'll do that. Dealing with people who repeatedly violate your boundaries can be so incredibly frustrating. My heart goes out to anyone who has to deal with that. And whether it's a spouse doing really hurtful behavior, it could also be a mother-in-law, child. It doesn't matter who we're talking about. When we're dealing with people who repeatedly ignore our boundaries, there's a couple things we can do. The first one is you continue to set strong, consistent boundaries. So no matter how other people are reacting, your boundaries are created for you. They are created so you have that fence around you, no matter how other people are acting. Also, record your boundary violations and your responses. Keep record of that. It's very easy, especially when you're dealing with toxic people, for them to gaslight and to say that never happened. And so when you have somebody break your boundaries, make record of that so you can go back and go, nope, this is what happened. This is how I responded. And it also helps keep you in check, that you're not letting other people's behavior send you out of control, that you have an action plan for you and how you will react yourself. Another thing that's really important is to be clear with yourself about what treatment you'll accept and what treatment you won't accept. So boundaries are so good because it's where you're really sitting down and you're going, I will only accept this in my life. For example, with Luke, with my boundaries, I said, you know what? My boundaries are going to be this, whether I'm married to Bob, Frank, Joe, it doesn't matter. If I am married to a sex addict, then these are going to be my boundaries. And if you are married to me, then you can choose whether to live by my boundaries or not. But this is what I will have. These are my non-negotiables. But as I created that list, it also helped me refine what I was willing to accept and what I wasn't. There's a quote and it says, what you accept will continue. That's it. I don't know. I was trying to make that more complicated. What you accept is what will continue. So we can make it super simple. My 4-year-old loves to push boundaries. He's always pushing up against anything I say. And if I let him get away with something, then that behavior will continue over and over and over. It isn't until I say enough and I hold to that boundary, that he stops. I heard this analogy one time, and in the analogy, and I don't think it's actually accurate. I don't live on a farm, but it said that if you were to create a fence around your farm, and you had a cow, and that cow all of a sudden gets this new fence, that cow would walk along the fence, pushing along each side of it, trying to figure out like where the weak points are. And if it found a weak point, it would push really hard, and it would knock that fence down, and it would get out and have its freedom. And it was related to boundaries with toxic people, that toxic people will push to see if there's holes, to see if there's weaknesses, if there's ways that they can get through. And so, and definitely see this with my children, that they do this. And so when you find those holes in your boundaries, and the way you know that there's holes in your boundaries is when you start feeling those resentments. When you are having that resentment come in, then you know that a boundary needs to be created for your own safety. You also have to accept that some people, no matter what you do, no matter how logically you put it, how perfect your boundary is, how much it makes sense, some people will never respect your boundaries, and it's not your job to convince them to. Your boundaries, your if-thens, your thens are things that you can do, that you can control. This is the hardest thing, is you have to let go of trying to control other people's behaviors. It won't work, and it will leave you spinning. It will leave you feeling out of control. It will leave you in that victim mentality, which is the last place we want to be. Another thing is detaching from the outcome, meaning it goes back to that we can't control the other people. And so when we have our boundaries, we want to say, okay, I can't make this boundary because it might hurt their feelings, or I can't make this boundary because they will get mad at me, or A, B, C, D. You could come up with a million reasons why to not make the boundary, but learning to get healthy enough to detach from whatever that outcome is, to let it go, and know that when you're making healthy decisions for you and your life, that will be healthy for everyone else around you, whether they accept it or not. And then just know that sometimes you do have to detach, you have to pull back, you have to create that space, which is never fun, especially with people that we love. A spouse, especially, there's times that creating that safety, pulling back until that person is safe enough to re-engage is the healthiest way. So back to that initial question, why do I create boundaries if they're just going to overrun them? Because you're creating the boundaries for you. You're not creating them for somebody else. You are enough. You are worth the work of taking care of yourself. And nobody should love you as much as you love you. And I know that probably sounds a little crazy, but for other people to love you and for you to love other people, it starts with loving yourself. It starts with getting centered with yourself and figuring out what those boundaries are. And boundaries are one of those things. Me and my therapist, we spent months working on my boundaries, because for me, it was so foreign, this concept of, I thought, well, if I really love him, then I shouldn't need boundaries. A good, healthy relationship doesn't have boundaries, and that's BS. Healthy relationships have boundaries. God has boundaries with us, and healthy relationships do have boundaries. My husband and I were completely enmeshed, and I thought that was healthy. I thought the closer we were, the healthier we were, and it wasn't healthy for either of us. And so learning those healthy boundaries of how much to let in, when to let in, where to keep my space has been one of the most healing and best things I've done for my marriage.